to me, knowing more of these stories, the backstory of why the different generations see things differently, and being able to share that spectrum of traditional mindset all the way down to kind of the new workforce mindset of millennials and Gen Z, being able to share those stories and share that spectrum is really eye-opening for people. And I feel like I lived through it, that I have the battle scars to show for those conflicts and that frustration. But then through my work now, I've been able to discover the backstory of where that conflict comes from, where those different mindsets come from. And that's how we're able to bridge the gap in both directions.
Welcome to the Strategic Momentum Podcast, the show where we share tips, stories, and advice from progressive leaders on what it takes to break through that business inertia and propel you and your business forward. I'm your host, Connie Steele. Bridging the generational divide is a major challenge for business leaders today. There are 3 generations in the modern day workplace, each with their own diverse career aspirations and expectations. To create an environment that leverages the talent, value, and strength of this new workforce requires a keen understanding of their different perspectives and an approach to ensure they collectively build momentum for your organization. Cara Silletto is a workforce thought leader in employee retention and the author of Staying Power: Why Your Employees Leave and How to Keep Them Longer. As president and chief retention officer at Crescendo Strategies, she works with companies to reduce unnecessary employee turnover by bridging generational gaps and making managers more effective in their roles. Today, Cara shares insights into the mindset differences of millennials, Gen Xers, and baby boomers, and how to apply these important perspectives to effectively manage and retain your workforce. Because a sustainable and productive one can only be achieved when everyone has a common understanding of one another. To start, we'll learn how her personal journey as a millennial helped shape her approach.
So a lot of my career early on was spent in some type of training and development. I was always helping folks reach their potential, whether that was as a trainer for corporate groups, or I worked at an association and was hiring trainers and speakers to do conferences and professional education. So a lot of my background in my 20s was somewhat related to adult education, or more specifically in the corporate world of corporate continuing education and learning. Then I went out on my own in 2012, and after getting my MBA in entrepreneurship, I started with entrepreneurial consulting and helping startups write their business plans. But then I realized pretty quickly that I was not a fan of telling people their baby was ugly. That was what happened quite often in that role, because, we all have a dream of some big thing we want to launch. And several of my first clients had great dreams, but had not crunched the numbers yet or hadn't done the market research. So when I did that part of the growth for them, then we had to kind of shut things down. So I decided to, at that point, really listen to the market. And I was doing some general consulting in the training space and just sitting in as an interim for people who were missing key staff and things like that. And as I listened to the market, which I had learned from that entrepreneurship MBA program, I just kept hearing people over and over complaining about millennials. And the management was complaining about millennials. The millennials were complaining, saying, I'm not a millennial and I don't want to be a millennial. They were trying to distance themselves from the label because, of course, it had gotten pretty nasty and pretty negative. And so I just heard all of this, kind of mumbling and grumbling around the generational differences. And I thought, well, wait a minute, I'm a millennial. What does that mean? And why are people so upset about it? And what is the business problem that is caused by all of this conflict and frustration about the generational gaps? So I started diving into anything I could get my hands on about generations in the workplace. I started thinking about my childhood as one of the early millennials. I was born in 1981. And I thought, well, what was different about my upbringing than my parents' upbringing and even my friends' upbringing who were either my age or maybe a little older or younger than me? And I started to identify some real stories and very powerful information that explained why it is that previous generations think millennials are so entitled. So, for example, credit cards became mainstream for middle class families in the 1980s and 90s. And before that, if you didn't have the money in your pocket, if your parents didn't have the cash, then it was a light Christmas, and yet with my generation, even if my dad and his business had a bad year, they didn't want the kids to suffer. And so they just charged everything, and they would, let our Christmas kind of still explode and give us everything we asked for, as long as they could have access to credit. So it was just really, really powerful for me to learn about those differences. And I started training on that. And, then we actually expanded that program into, or that thought process into, why do companies care about bridging generational gaps? And that was when we realized it was because it was causing a lot of employee turnover. The managers not understanding the new workforce having different expectations of what that employer-employee relationship looks like. And coming out of the recession, every year I just saw businesses struggle more and more with how to retain their staff. So we pivoted a little bit, and now my company, Crescendo Strategies, we focus solely on reducing unnecessary employee turnover. And bridging the generational gap is still a very large component of our work, and one of the things that is most requested by our clients.
Through Cara's own experience and her innate understanding of the millennial audience, coupled with pivotal insights and lessons learned throughout the years, she's found that what's critical to bridging that gap between generations starts with understanding the spectrum of perspectives.
I learned that there are all different perspectives, and that there is no truth or fact about what is professional or unprofessional. And really, professionalism is subjective. And so a lot of our work today is helping managers understand the different sides and different perspectives. So we talk a lot about a traditional mindset and how business has been done and what those expectations are as far as work hours, and work ethic is also subjective. So I'll talk to a manager that says, if you're the first one in and the last one to leave, that's my hardest worker. But then we explain to them that times have changed in that now people can work from home. They can work on their phones. A lot of people work in bed before they even put their feet on the floor. They'll grab their phone and start reading emails and working, or they'll grab their laptop and work at night after their children have gone to bed. And some people in the workplace, we now have the internet. So sometimes you will think someone's working, but they're shopping online or they're playing a game on their computer. And so I try to explain kind of the traditional mindset for the workers of where the managers might be coming from. This is why they believe that visibility at the office equals productivity, because 25 years ago, you had to be at your desk to be working, or at your station or at your office, wherever you worked from. And then I try to get the traditional managers to see the other side, that visibility doesn't always equal productivity in the workplace anymore. And here are the ways that people are working today, and what that means for their organization and how they can measure results instead of the time clock for a lot of their staff and things like that. So to me, knowing more of these stories, the backstory of why the different generations see things differently, and being able to share that spectrum of traditional mindset all the way down to kind of the new workforce mindset of millennials and Gen Z, being able to share those stories and share that spectrum is really eye-opening for people. And I feel like I lived through it, that I have the battle scars to show for those conflicts and that frustration. But then through my work now, I've been able to discover the backstory of where that conflict comes from, where those different mindsets come from. And that's how we're able to bridge the gap in both directions.
So, what are some of these specific generational differences, or as Cara calls them, mindsets? One is this need for more control and work-life balance among millennials, as well as recognition for the contributions they are making. This is something with which Cara herself is intimately familiar. She knew that entrepreneurship was something she wanted to venture into early on in her career, as her father had also run his own business. And that drive to do her own thing stemmed from her desire to ultimately have more control over her own schedule and create that work-life balance she felt wasn't always achievable with other roles and careers. Cara explains.
Well, many years ago, I knew in my younger career, I knew that I wanted to work for myself and I wanted to go out on my own, but I had no idea what my expertise would be and what I could bring to the table or what value I could bring for organizations. So I always had planted that seed of entrepreneurship, and my father owned his own business. So I had seen that. And for me, a lot of it also was around work-life balance. Now, that's to say that entrepreneurs, I need to put a little disclaimer here that entrepreneurs typically work way more hours than a normal job because they are doing all the different pieces and you have to fight every fire that pops up and all of that. But I knew that in some of my previous roles, they were very demanding careers, very demanding industries. For example, it would be something very deadline driven that was hurry up and wait. And it was based on other people's deadlines that you had no control over. And I knew that I did not want to live in that world when I became a mom. I knew that I was already sacrificing things at those jobs where I couldn't be on a local board of directors because I couldn't promise them that I could be there by 6:00 for a board meeting. If my client needed something, I was going to have to drop everything else and focus on that client. So I really didn't want that world. And I knew if I went into my own business, I would have much more control, not full control, but much more control over what my schedule looked like and how much I was going to travel or not and things like that. So yeah, I really went out on my own before I got married and had my child because I also knew that starting a business takes a lot of legwork and there's a lot of trial and error and building in the first few years. So I decided to do that as I was looking toward getting married and having kids in the next 5 years so I could grow that and then decide once I became a mom what my schedule was going to look like.
This desire for flexibility and placing a value on time is something that is actually yearned for across all generations. However, what has changed is that this is now demanded by the millennial workforce, which has caused friction in the workplace.
The difference is that most of what the millennial generation is asking for and even demanding from employers like work-life balance or more recognition for a job well done and things like that, or opportunities for advancement. Those are things that everybody has wanted over the years. The difference is that the baby boomers and the Gen Xers who were workers, they put up with being told things like, you have to pay your dues, you have to wait and be patient. And, I shouldn't have to thank you for showing up. That's why you get a paycheck. And, they were taught in a much more traditional work world where the things that the millennials are now pushing back on, they're saying, I'm not going to work somewhere that doesn't recognize my contributions. So I understand that I get a paycheck here, but I can go anywhere and get a paycheck. So I would like to get a paycheck and know that I am helping improve our clients' lives or helping the mission, or change the world or whatever it is that I want to be a part of. I want to know that I'm contributing to that and be recognized for what value I'm bringing to the organization. The other generations wanted that. But quick information about some demographics here that's pretty critical. The baby boomers were 80 million strong. Then Gen X was only 60 million strong. And the millennials are, again, 80 million strong. So what a lot of organizations did was when those Gen Xers came into the work world 25 years ago or more, they told them, this is what we expect of you. This is how to dress. Stay till the job gets done. This is what work ethic looks like. You're first one in and last one to leave. That's my hardest worker. But the Gen Xers, for the most part, they fell in line and followed those expectations that were put on them because they wanted to advance their career. And a lot of Gen Xers will tell me, oh yeah, I figured out pretty early that I had to play the boomer game if I was going to be successful. And so they kind of adopted those expectations and that level of professionalism. And then the millennials are looking at that going, Gen Xers, I'm pretty sure you just got taken advantage of. I'm pretty sure that they only pay you for 40 hours a week and you're working 50 or 60 or more. And I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to let that happen.
Another expectation is this desire to have a breadth of options in the workforce, as they have this yearning to constantly be flexing their muscles in different ways and building skill sets beyond what they are learning now. And that even ties into this trend towards mobility over security.
They are demanding options in the workplace. Everything from options on their schedule and where they work, options on uniforms. I mean, even an environment that has to have people in uniforms for whatever reason, the millennials are pushing back and saying, well, can I have a couple options? Does it have to be one uniform or could you do it in a few different shades of blue? Or could I wear a polo instead of a cardigan? Or, things like that. I mean, it just blows my mind what I see the workforce pushing back on today that's important to them. And again, a lot of the Gen Xers and things, they wanted those options. They just were not afforded that. So the employers today are realizing, a lot of them kind of have a wake-up call when I work with them of saying, wow, okay, I think we're about 5 to 10 years behind where we should have been because we weren't evolving with the workforce. We just kept doing what we did every day and put those expectations on the workers because the Gen Xers fell in line. And so we just expected everybody else to as well. And then, but they realized, like training and development, for example, the millennials demand training and development. They demand education and cross-training and advancement opportunities. Are you going to pay for me to go back to school? Or are you going to teach me more on the job? Things like that, where the previous generations, they didn't demand that. They didn't have that luxury. They wanted it. It would have been nice, but they didn't get that option. And so what you'll see today is if the millennials are not given choices and support and options in those things and opportunities for advancement, for example, they will absolutely bounce out of the company. They will go somewhere else that is allowing for those things because everybody's hiring today. So whether you're a specialist in an engineering field or you're an unskilled worker, it doesn't matter. You have options today. Everybody is looking for talent, and that puts a lot of the power, or I would call it more the advantage. It puts the advantage in the employee's hands because it's an employee's market right now with such low unemployment and such tremendous growth in our economy right now, where everybody's hiring to grow and backfill the positions that they're losing. So options in the workplace and those opportunities for advancement are critical.
Do you think, all of that coupled with that mindset that you actually mentioned earlier is that millennials feel that they can get a paycheck anywhere? Mm-hmm. I thought that was really interesting that you talked about that earlier, is that, well, I don't feel I'm limited. I don't have to stay in this place. No matter what it is, there's a way that I can make money, which is not the mindset of earlier generations. It was about security and staying with where you were currently and extending that as long as possible because it was stability versus now it's very different.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that makes millennials is their interest in mobility. That they will even, I find the data behind this fascinating, they will decide what city they want to go live in and they will move there with no job. And they will just move there and figure it out. They say, I want to go to Denver or I want to go to Austin, these big popular cities or whatever. And they will say, I'm just going to move there. You go, oh, okay, well, what job did you get? Or are you transferring? No, I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'll just drive. I'll drive Uber and Lyft until I find something. And I can't tell you how many of my Lyft drivers around the country, as I travel and do speaking engagements and training, my Lyft drivers, so many of them will say, oh yeah, I just moved to town either that last 6 months or even 5 years ago. I said, well, what brought you to Seattle? Oh, well, I just visited a friend here, fell in love with it, decided to move out here and, started driving, and they either still drive full time or maybe they did get a job and they drive part time or whatnot. But it just amazes me the level of value that millennials put on mobility. And also with me, I thought it was funny in my early 20s, I bought a house because I was going to be responsible and I was going to build equity and, all this great stuff. So I bought a house. And then I realized, that limits my mobility. And I decided to go to grad school in a different city. So I rented out my fully furnished home. I left everything there and I rented out my house to other people, other friends of mine, so that I could go live in this other city for grad school. And then I came back later, that type of thing. So we really do value being able to go other places. And it's the same with the work. A lot of it comes down to, we also don't feel obligated to stay with an employer. And much of that was because of what we saw with our parents. I mentioned my mom was a corporate accountant and she got divorced when I was 11 and she got laid off 3 times before I graduated high school. So she told me, don't ever depend on a spouse or a company. You've got to be able to take care of yourself, and don't feel obligated to stay somewhere because there's no guarantees. They could cut your pension if you have a pension, or they could cut your job or cut your hours or whatever it is, benefits, that type of thing. And so she just said, stay somewhere where you're happy. But if you're not happy or you're not getting what you need out of that employer, there are other options and you can go somewhere else. Where I think the previous generations were not only told that if you make a commitment, you should stick it out, right? They were taught that type of obligatory commitment and loyalty. But also we saw a lot of our parents get the raw end of that deal where a spouse would leave them, or a company would lay them off. And so knowing that there are no guarantees, it really makes that employer-employee relationship very different. And I tell employers all the time that it has to be mutually beneficial today. It must be. The employee is going to leave if they don't, if they're not happy, if it's not the right fit for them anymore. And an employer is going to cut that job if they don't need that person or that role anymore. So as long as things are mutually beneficial, then we're good. And I think the millennials are one of the best equipped generations to manage that situation of being flexible and mobile to go elsewhere.
To understand these millennial expectations of work-life balance, recognition, optionality, and flexibility requires having context of their upbringing and advice they got from their parents. Their parents were told,
if you make a commitment, you stick it out. You owe that company for training you and paying your bills and things like that.
However, they lived in a world of job uncertainty where their hard work and company commitment oftentimes didn't pay off in the long run. That resulted in a very different parenting mantra. Cara shares more about her mom's advice, which provides valuable insight around the millennial mindset.
She said, Cara, just be aware that once your salary, any hour that you work over 40 is a donation back to the company. And unless you see that you are specifically going to get some kind of benefit for that, right? If you're in line for a promotion or a bonus and working those extra hours is going to get you there, that's great. Do it if that's going to benefit you. But other than that, do your job, do a really good job at what you do for those 40 hours. Stay focused, get the job done as best you can, but don't let them keep piling things on your plate and piling things on your plate and piling things on your plate to where you're forced to work a lot of overtime when in reality, the company should hire another person for that, for those extra things. And so that, you can imagine then how I came into the work world with a totally different mindset. And then the employers thought, oh, she has no work ethic. She's a clock watcher, things like that, because I wasn't willing to let anybody take advantage of me and keep putting stuff on my plate when I already had a full workload.
Further, the experiences millennials had in their upbringing were not top-down hierarchies with limited choices and a do-as-you're-told mentality in the home. Rather, it was much more inclusive and collaborative. So this demand for optionality in the work environment stemmed from having a choice and a voice from an early age, which has been perceived as a sense of entitlement from other generations.
A lot of things changed in the 80s and 90s, and I would argue that our entire society is entitled today. And of course, every generation thinks that the next generation has it easy, right? Back in the day, they said, oh, I didn't have microwaves when I was a kid, and a VCR or things like that. So as technology comes in or conveniences come in, every generation gets frustrated with the next group who thinks they have it easy. But for us, with the entitlement factor, there are a lot of things that happened, like I said, in the 80s and 90s, like the increase in drive-thrus and all these restaurants that were available to our working moms when we had to run from school to practice to rehearsal to, all these things in the evening. So I grew up in drive-thrus. I mean, I grew up on McDonald's and Wendy's and things like that because I was in so many activities and going from here to there. And so as a 7-year-old, 10-year-old, 12-year-old, I was able to special order. I don't like mustard. I've never liked mustard. I still don't like mustard. And I could go through a drive-through and ask for no mustard, right? I didn't have to eat something that I didn't want to. And so you can imagine then these younger folks who grew up and came into the work world when I did, and we were used to having a voice and a vote and a say in things. In fact, when I was a kid, my parents would rotate who got to pick things, right? So if a family decision was being made, we would rotate around the family, my mom, my dad, my sister, and me. And of course, sometimes my father put his foot down and would say no or whatever. But to be that kid that got to choose where our family went on vacation and what we had for dinner and things like that, then I came into the work world at 22 and quickly realized nobody wanted my opinion. Nobody. So I was a nobody. I was the, rookie. They just wanted me to pay my dues and watch and learn. And of course, that was very, very frustrating. In fact, I got in trouble a lot in my early career for what they called overstepping my bounds. And I would speak up when I wasn't supposed to, or I would challenge somebody when I wasn't supposed to, or I would ask why when I wasn't supposed to. And so that was very frustrating. But I did have really great mentors, thank goodness, that helped me navigate a lot of that.
These perceptions of millennials and corresponding misconceptions can create inertia in the workforce and therefore in business. Breaking through starts with understanding the diverse mindsets at play and not limiting employees to age groups.
So first things first, as I talk about generations, I like to make sure that everyone understands it's not about the year you were born. It's much more about your mindset and the way you were raised. So there are a lot of folks out there who I refer to as old soul millennials. And the old soul millennials, they might have been born in that time frame, which is typically seen as 1981 to 1996. They may have been born during that time frame, but they were raised with a more traditional mindset. So they may have been raised on a farm or in a small conservative community. They may have been raised by grandparents, or they might have a military background. Things like that would give them a much more traditional view of the employer-employee relationship. And so I just want to make sure that everybody knows I'm not really talking about a certain birth year time when I talk about the millennial mindset. And in fact, I know a lot of Gen Xers and even some baby boomers who have a very millennial mindset, where they see that relationship differently as well. So that's one of the big misconceptions, is that people should not put other folks into a bucket just based on, oh, you're in your 20s or you're in your 50s. You must be like this, right? So that's a big one. Others are that definition of professionalism, that we work differently with one another. A big one that I address a lot of times is the perspective on authority. So this drives people crazy, because a traditional mindset is going to think about the hierarchy. They're going to respect the chain of command. That's what they were raised on. That's what they were taught, probably even at home, where their father was the head of the household type of scenario. And then in the workplace, you have titles, you have seniority, you have tenure, you have that structure of the hierarchy to follow and respect. They were also taught things as children like respect your elders. Why? Because I said so. The end.
Yeah.
Like that was it. And you don't challenge that stuff. Where then the other end of the spectrum, which I should also let you know that there's no right or wrong on the spectrum. All I do is try to express to people the different sides of the spectrum so they can respect one another and hopefully compromise and find some middle ground that they can settle on. So if we talk about that kind of authority perspective from a traditional mindset on one extreme end, then on the other extreme end, you have a younger generation who was raised like me, who had a voice, who had a vote in the family, or at least some type of say on what do you want for dinner? Well, I don't like meatloaf. So Mom, could you make me a grilled cheese sandwich so I don't have to eat the meatloaf that's on the table? Oh, sure, honey. We got choices. And we were also given, I have to bring up the trophies, right? The participation ribbons. We were told that we did a great job just for being on the team, or A for effort, kiddo, and things like that. So that type of upbringing, a lot of people like to blame that on the millennials and say, well, the real world doesn't have trophies, so get over it. When instead, now the new workers come into the workplace and we are much more egalitarian, which means we see everybody as bringing value to the organization. We don't see it so much as the hierarchy, the traditional model top-down hierarchy. I equate it more to a wheel with spokes. In all these different roles and responsibilities, everybody brings value to the organization, because you don't need directors and a C-suite if you don't have frontline workers, right? There's no company. and you can't have just all frontline workers with no leadership and no budgeting and oversight and, planning and things like that. So the younger workers are going to come in with more of that wheel with spokes type of mentality about the relationship of all the workers. And they want that recognition, like, hey, even though I am an entry-level person, I still bring value and I still expect to be respected in my role and to not be treated less than anybody else. If you hear people saying like, hey, rookie or junior or sport or newbie or whatever, like that's not cool, because the younger workers don't want to be treated as a lower class citizen in the pecking order or whatnot. It doesn't mean that they think everybody should be paid the same, at all different levels, or that titles shouldn't exist, but they just feel that that it's really important that everyone be recognized for that value, and that the organization realize they need everybody. Nobody's more important than somebody else in that wheel.
So in light of, this perspective, mindset, and even just sort of also behavior, this sense of egalitarianism that you talked about, would you also say that translates into probably a more integrated type of thinking where they know there are multiple people that are involved and wanting to make sure that everybody is collaborating, getting a voice. So this ability to flex and work with multiple people, no matter where they are, who they are, just comes more naturally versus that top-down model.
It's interesting because sometimes I'll have older managers that say to me, well, just wait till the millennials get into management and then they're going to have a rude awakening when people don't respect them or when people, push back on their policies and things like you're pushing back on mine. And the reality is I'm seeing that that happens with some millennials if the power and the ego go to their head when they get promoted. But for most of the millennials, they're actually doing amazingly well in management positions because they do not believe that one size fits all. Like many folks with a traditional model. And I'm seeing a lot of success there because the millennial leaders, they will adjust their style. They will recognize people. It comes much more naturally for them to recognize people for a job well done, even if they didn't necessarily go above and beyond. But I'm just going to let you know that, hey, I appreciate you being here every day. This is great. You're doing great work. Thanks so much for being a part of our team. Right. And that comes much more naturally to the generation Y, which is the millennials. It really, that perspective makes them a great manager. And I can understand, I got to tell you, one of the other big frustrations, I can understand that Gen X is extremely frustrated, because, and if I were a Gen Xer, I'd probably have a chip on my shoulder. Like, wait a minute, I had to pay my dues and watch and learn and, do all this stuff I didn't want to do, like wear pantyhose and work late. And, I had to do all this stuff to get to where I am. And now that I'm in management, the millennials are pushing back on me saying, why? Or no. I'm not going to do that. So I would be very frustrated too. But I think the Gen Xers and baby boomers who are really digging their heels in the sand and saying, by God, this is how business is done. And I am the boss. And that's all you need to know. If they're digging their heels in, they're really struggling to build a strong relationship with their staff. And what we're seeing, of course, is they're really struggling to retain talent. Right? Because nobody wants to work for that mentality anymore, that type of boss. But then there are also a lot of Gen Xers who have said, yay, the millennials have helped us get rid of the stupid policies about pantyhose or tattoos or, that kind of thing. And they're like, yes, go millennials, go. We're behind you 100%. And they want to work from home as well and have flexible schedules and be able to go coach their kids' games and that type of thing. So it really is interesting to see where a lot of the Gen Xers fall on the spectrum because some of them are pseudo boomers and they are very traditional. And then there are others who are very millennial or at least millennial friendly. And they watch these millennials and learn from the millennials of what their expectations are. And then they're becoming better leaders through that as well because they say, oh, well, I didn't realize that you would prefer to be recognized in this way, where this other employee prefers to be recognized in this way. Okay, well, I'm glad you guys told me because now I can adjust my style now that I'm aware, right?
Right.
And that didn't happen before. It was the traditional model. You go above and beyond, you pick up an extra shift or close an extra deal, then I'm going to say thanks, good job. But if you just show up and do your job, then good riddance to you. That's why you get a paycheck.
Just as an employee shouldn't be judged by their age, the modern workplace can no longer be assumed to operate in a certain way. It isn't the linear hierarchical structure it once was. Rather, there is this expectation of a more egalitarian and flexible environment that fosters integrated thinking and collaboration. And adapting to this new approach is necessary to engage and retain millennials, or really more broadly, those with a millennial mindset. So what advice does Cara have for millennials with respect to bridging the divide with their traditional mindset bosses in order to better align with their expectations as well as their own?
Yeah, great question. So when I was about 30, I realized that some of my millennial friends had figured out how to play the game, and others of my millennial friends didn't even have a clue there was a game to be played. So I would say that my advice would be to watch and observe, see what's going on. Don't just focus on yourself and where you're headed and how you want your career to progress, but look around at what's working for people within my organization. What's working? How are people getting those promotions or getting those new opportunities? And then outside the company, okay, so my friend is getting promoted faster than me. Then why is that? Is it because of the industry that she's in? Is it because she went and got extra education that I didn't go back for? What is it that moves the needle and really gets you to that next level? So I think watching and analyzing what's going to work and not just being frustrated like, I'm not moving fast enough here. I got to find a new job. Because finding a new job is not always a forward movement. Sometimes it's lateral. And I've even seen people take a step back because the earning potential or the work-life balance, for example, was going to be better in that other field. And that's okay. I'm not saying you always have to move forward, but I think looking at your career plans and your career path much more holistically and farther down the line is going to help you a lot more than just being frustrated and saying, I got to get out of here. I got to find a new job because my friends are all moving faster than I am, or I want more money, or whatever it is that's a motivator. And instead just be a little more patient, not super patient, not overly patient, but be a little more patient, watch and learn, and make sure that you truly are giving it your all. Because sometimes we like to blame other people of why I'm not moving up fast enough. But then you might look internally and say, well, have I mastered this particular job? Because my employer thinks that I'm good at my job, but I haven't taken this role to the next level. I haven't mastered this job and really advanced the role and the responsibilities for the company. So that may be an area where you could benefit by mastering it and learning more and having that opportunity to grow within the position, and the company gets more value out of you becoming more valuable in that role, more effective in that role. So have a little bit more patience and desire to master what it is that you're doing, not just, okay, well, I know how to do this job. What's next?
Right.
And instead, how can I take this job and this role and these responsibilities? How can I take that to the next level and do it even better and faster and bring more value to the company? Because I'll be honest, that's what the company cares about. They don't really care. I mean, I hate to say that, but they don't care about you and your advancement plans. That's not how companies make money. The companies make money off of people really getting the job down pat and doing it again and again and making it better and faster and cheaper and more efficient, more effective, that type of thing. And they will see more value in you and more opportunities to advance you if you bring value to the company. So I would definitely give advice of understand how your business and how your industry operate and make money beyond your job and your role or even your department. And then you can find ways to bring more value to the organization, which they should recognize and then be able to put that value back on you.
You brought up a really interesting point, and I think a common challenge that many deal with, where there is this very significant sense of self-interest, or at least, millennials are seen as very self-interested and focused on really singularly one thing. Do you think that is a misconception, or do you think that's somewhat of a truth, but in light of really those generational dynamics that they had when they were growing up, and that folks just can't recognize how to help them look more outwardly versus always looking inwardly?
Absolutely. I would like to say that that's a myth. I'd like to be able to debunk that one. But the reality is that as a millennial generation, we grew up with our parents because of them getting laid off and things like that. they also told us that they learned at age 40, age 50, age 60 years old, they learned that life is short and you shouldn't be unhappy for long. Because a lot of them stayed in a job, for example, or stayed in a marriage, for example, where they were unhappy for 10, 15, 20 years. And when they finally walked out of those situations that they were unhappy in, they turned around and told their children, don't do it. Don't be unhappy for long. Try to fix the situation if you can, but don't be miserable. And so they were the ones who actually encouraged us to bounce and to follow our passion and do what you love and things like that. I mean, their parents never told them that. They told them, no, you go get a good job and you provide for your family. That's your goal, that type of thing. So I think it's funny because the millennials translated that parenting over to what we call YOLO, right? You've heard of YOLO, you only live once, which, by the way, it's not cool anymore. Don't hashtag that. But it's still really relevant because that's why people quit. I'm not happy and I only live once. So I'm going to go somewhere else where I'm happy, where I have a better boss, where I have a better schedule, better work-life balance, whatever it is, even in personal situations. I'm out. I'm not happy and this doesn't look like it's changing anytime soon. So I'm out. And it certainly looks like self-interest, and it probably is self-interest, but it's because our parents told us not to live our life for other people, not to live it for our spouses or our companies or, that type of thing. And instead to make sure that we're living our best life and that we're as happy as we can be. So I definitely think that pendulum has swung a little too far, especially from an employer standpoint with the clients that I work with. They will say, oh my gosh, I reprimanded somebody for being late every day this week, and then they just quit. Right? And I was trying to hold them accountable, or I was trying to give them some constructive criticism, and they went looking for another job because they can't handle it, that type of thing. So I do think that it's swung a little bit too far as, well, I want to be happy all the time. And the reality in the business world is, you really have to be able to weather the storm. You really have to be able to get through a busy season or a tough spot in the organization and not just bail. I think there's a tremendous learning opportunity for young people to stick it out a little longer than they wanted to, right? But I think we need to do that in the workplace a little bit too, is to say, okay, as soon as things get uncomfortable for me here, I'm going to give it another 6 months. I'm going to see if I can make it through a tough time and what I can learn from it and how I can grow in that adverse situation or those conditions. And then if it hasn't resolved itself or gotten better within 6 months or 12 months, whatever your magic number is, then I'll start looking for something else. So yeah, you're right that there's definitely a little more self-interest that's happening. I think it's a good thing because the employers can't take advantage of the staff anymore. But I also think that there's a middle ground there that we really need employees as well to push a little bit harder through the rough times so that it can be a win-win for everybody.
Conversely, what advice does Cara have for traditional mindset bosses, of which many are Gen X or Boomer bosses, to better motivate, manage, collaborate, and retain their millennial employees?
I would definitely encourage, as I mentioned, communicating your expectations because people cannot read your mind. Okay. Other people were not raised like you, whether they're older or younger or whatnot. And people don't see the world and the workplace like you do. So to me, I believe everybody and especially the leaders and managers, you have to communicate the expectations much more clearly than you ever have. Because a lot of managers will tell me, oh, I do. I tell them, that the shift starts at 9. But then the handbook says that as long as you clock in by 9:05, you're not late, by compliance standards. So what you're really telling them is clock in by 9:05. And so they don't realize that a lot of the new hires are getting mixed messages like that, or not any message at all, that they're not communicating the standard expectations that have existed for a long, long time, but a new hire doesn't know that, similar to me not wearing my shoes in the workplace. So yeah, that's a really big one about communicating expectations. And also that is going to help them meet you in the middle. I'm not asking the managers and leaders just to, hey, you need to do all the changes and you need to do better as a leader. Of course, they need to become a better leader, continue to do that. But if you communicate your expectations, that typically makes your workers better, because now they know the expectations. And what do you think I did after they told me that I should keep my shoes on? I kept my shoes on that whole time. So yeah, definitely communicating expectations. And also with the Gen X leaders, realizing that one size doesn't fit all. It's really important that we don't just say, well, this is how I'm going to communicate to my people, or this is how I manage and that's my style. And instead understanding that the workforce is very diverse now, diverse in all different ways, diversity of mindset, gender diversity, generational diversity, all types of diversity. And that you must be a situational leader today, where you can adjust and adapt to the situation in front of you.
So with what you just said about being a situational leader and learning to adapt and adjust, what's really interesting to me is that there's actually chief people officer that I just spoke to. And she is also dealing with some of those dynamics of, her millennial workforce wanting to move up more quickly. And so they've actually employed changes in their promotional process, I should say, or the way they look at helping people move through the ranks and flexing it so that, where I think expectations could have been year and a half, 2 years and so forth, they've put very specific time frames in place saying, the first 3 months is about, getting your feet wet, understanding the job. And then, the next 3 months after that is then learning to master the job. And then after that, and then you're trying to even progress even further, because she has gotten feedback and input saying, well, why can't I get promoted in 6 months? Right. Which is so different than, previous generations. But, their approach has been about really taking this test and learn approach to figuring out what would be the right path and what would be the right programs or policies or processes to really fit with a different audience. So, she is looking at it through that lens and understanding, she kind of does her own persona development, so to speak, and looking at things very holistically to, pivot and adjust accordingly, which is great. It seems definitely in line with the recommendations that you've been providing to your clients.
Yes, absolutely. Creative advancement is one of the number one things that we teach and that we help companies with, because there is an expectation of advancement. It doesn't have to be promotions necessarily, but just sprinkling out different incentives for people that they get over time. It drives me crazy when a company says, well, they get this much paid time off at day one, and then they get a little bit more after 1 year, and then they get a little bit more after 5 years. And I'm just thinking, wow, so those are the milestones that you are putting your carrots, right? The carrot on a stick incentive. That's where you're putting your incentives, is at as soon as they start, and then the 1 year and the 5 year. And that same company tells me, well, we can't keep any of our engineers more than 2 or 3 years. I say, well, that's because there's no incentive for them to stay to the 3-year mark or the 4-year mark, because a lot of companies now are just budgeting for a 2 or 3% pay increase, which is not a raise. That's just a cost of living adjustment. And so again, the employee can go somewhere else and get that paycheck. they can go anywhere else and get that same 2 to 3, maybe 4% pay increase annually. And so to create a place where people want to work, you have to put new carrots out there. And not that they have to necessarily cost a lot of money. It could be that after 6 months, you get a mentor or you get put on a certain committee that's an employee committee type thing. A lot of my clients now are putting out 90-day and 6 months and 1 year and 18-month incentives. And a lot of those incentives are access to education or access to other growth opportunities like cross-training, like mentors, or actually going to get another certificate or degree and things like that. Also, we teach companies to build out advancement levels within a specific job. So if we look at a bank teller position, for example, this one's just easy because everybody knows what a bank teller is, right? And if we look at a bank tellers used to go into that role for their whole career. Probably your parents had a bank teller that knew their name and they could always count on them being there at the bank when they went in for something. And today, even my banking and credit union clients, they will tell me that the new hires coming in as tellers, they don't see that role as a career position anymore. They see it as a stepping stone. So as soon as we can get the senior leadership to shift their mindset and to accept and embrace that that position is now a stepping stone position. It's not that somebody can't make it a career, but it's that most of the new hires don't see it that way. And so once they embrace that that is a stepping stone position, and I see that in every industry, every company has these roles that used to be career and they've shifted now to be a stepping stone position. So if we take that stepping stone position and we look at what does it take to be a Mac Daddy bank teller, right? What is the troubleshooting, the client relationships, soft skills, technical skills, system knowledge, all this stuff that to be like the best of the best bank teller. That's now a level 3 bank teller. Then you look at what is the absolute basic knowledge and information that somebody has to have to be a bank teller. And those competencies are now your level 1. Then you take something in between, some combination of technical skills and the leadership skills, for example, and you can build out a custom level 2 that's in between. And poof, all of a sudden, you have now created 3 levels of bank tellers, which means there are 2 promotions available, more opportunities for advancement, even though the company still just needs bank tellers, right? I don't care what level they are necessarily. I just need people at the window. I need people who know how to do the job. And so they can then create those extra levels of advancement within the company. But so many companies years ago, I mean, more than a decade ago, they flattened the hierarchy and they got rid of all the assistant levels and the junior levels. And they got rid of all of that, which was okay with Gen X, who waited 5, 7, 10 years for a promotion. But the millennials are saying, not going to happen. I won't be here in 5 years unless you're going to advance me and promote me, or at least give me other incentives to stay, something new that I'm going to get, more paid time off, access to something. What do you have for me? Because if it's just the paycheck and the 2 to 3% increase, I can go anywhere for that.
And what advice would you impart on your younger self?
Oh, my younger self. Enjoy your 20s. I kept saying over and over in my 20s, I just can't wait to be 30. I can't wait to be 30 because when I'm 30, people will take me seriously and I will have paid my dues and, that type of thing. And so I was a bit of a workaholic in my 20s because I was trying to meet everyone's expectations and to play the game and grow my career really quickly and things like that. And I had a great 20s, but I do wish that I had slowed down a little bit to enjoy my 20s and maybe go out a few more weekends, stay out a little later, and that type of thing. Yeah, I didn't really do a whole lot of that. I had a good time, but I didn't party. Maybe I should have partied a little bit more.
And to close, any last words of wisdom?
Oh my goodness. Just, be aware that other people are different and stop judging people because of those differences. Everybody needs to realize that they are Goldilocks. And it's easy to think that people who are different than you, whether they come in earlier to the office or later to the office, it's easy to think, well, they're ridiculous. And so just catch yourself if you start to get judgmental of others and realize that there are different ways to work and different ways to live. And I encourage people to think about others in a way. My phrase is, you do you. Right? It's not the way that I'm going to parent, or it's not the place that I would go on vacation, but hey, you do you. Right?
Great. Yes. And what's the best way listeners can connect with you?
Oh, absolutely. So, of course, I'm on LinkedIn, Cara Silletto. I'm the only one out there, pretty easy to find. And our company site is crescendostrategies.com.
Thank you so much for your time today. Such great insight and perspective on really how to bridge that gap between generations to be able to fuel business momentum.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
Creating alignment in a diverse workforce isn't easy, but it's critical to fostering business productivity, efficiency, and employee retention in a rapidly evolving and competitive environment. And this alignment is more likely to happen when your employees at all levels and generations feel like they have a voice and are valued. Understanding the rationale behind the desires of your employees is the first step to providing people solutions in your business. The millennial generation has arrived with a new set of expectations, but also with a new perspective that could benefit organizational culture as a whole. Harnessing these ideas while communicating existing expectations will help your business evolve, gain momentum, and grow. Thanks for listening to the Strategic Momentum Podcast. You can connect with Cara on LinkedIn at Cara Silletto, that's CaraSilletto, or visit crescendostrategies.com. If you've liked what you heard, please subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And while you're there, please leave us a review. To hear previous episodes or get show notes from this episode, you can visit us at flywheelassociates.com/podcast. And don't forget to follow Strategic Momentum on Facebook and Instagram. I'm Connie Steele, and you've been listening to the Strategic Momentum Podcast.